Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call this. You all right? Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to mute my computer. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, we'll call this workshop meeting, January 4th, 2023, meeting to order. With that, please join me in opening exercise, the pledge, and a moment of silence, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Stacy, would you just record the roll, please? Sure. All right, so 1.04, looking for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Fatsinger. Second by Mr. Deliker. Any comments or questions? Any changes? Okay, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? All right, nice have it. All right, 1.05. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting. Thanks for coming. 1.06, courtesy of the floor. At this time, we entertain any comments from guests here. Just request that you state the township that you're from, if you would like to adjust the board. If you don't want to adjust the board at this time, at the end of the meeting, there'll be another moment where you can also adjust the board. So being the only two, would you guys?
Now,
Yes, if you would like.
Lynn Township,
And the name for the record too.
Laura Zama. So I have children in the elementary school and the middle school. My elementary school experience is amazing. The leadership is amazing. Middle school is a hot mess since last year when my daughter entered. I had an instance, Mrs. Wall was very reactive and not proactive. This year, she's taken a new leaf and wants to have these seminars on sexting and social media. They have the first seminar on sexting. They bring someone in, whoever it was, I don't remember. Essentially, Mrs. Wall told me she did not prove what this woman would be saying to my child, what video she'd be telling my child to go home and watch, as she also did not view the video. The video is about a girl who commits suicide because she was bullied relentlessly about a sexting incident. My daughter went to Mrs. Wall with questions. She was shooed out of the office and told email. She emailed her. 10 days later, Mrs. Wall still did not get back to her. I emailed all of you. 2 people in this room got back to me. I didn't hear from the superintendent. I didn't hear from the assistant superintendent. I heard from Mrs. Wall yelling at me on how I emailed everyone and I didn't go to her directly. Why am I going to you directly when my child did and you dismissed her? And you then didn't watch the video. You had someone come in to tell my child to watch. How are you telling children to go home and watch a video on suicide and then not bring it up the next day in class on how you really shouldn't do that? That's not the only way out. And how do you not view the video and approve it first? How does she not know what these speakers are going to be speaking about to my children? Because then the second time she has someone come in, it's the dangers of social media. I asked both of my kids, one are in 6th and one is in 7th, separately. What was your takeaway? Talk on Snapchat, it deletes after 24 hours. What is she teaching my children? She is there to teach them and make sure they're in a safe learning environment. My job is to teach them social media. My job is to have these conversations with them. If they want to have these conversations with them, parents need to be informed beforehand and not with Mr. DeVico's little email once a week, having a conversation on sexting, having a conversation on dangers of social media and giving no information as to what's going to be said. And then not following up with these kids after they have these assemblies. Like, has anyone not learned what's going on in this country with the kids with social media and sexting and all of these issues? They do end up sometimes wind up committing suicide because they feel so alone with no one having consequences. Because my daughter's main question to Mrs. Wall was, well, what was the consequence of that video? Like, what was the purpose of me watching it? Her and Mrs. Smith's response to my 13-year-old, then 12-year-old was, this video was from 14 years ago. We didn't know much then. So why are you having her watch a video in 2022 on a video that happened 14 years ago if it doesn't pertain to what's happening now to show these kids consequences? You're trying to show them consequences. What's the consequence? That the girl did something she shouldn't have done? In the video, it says, the police officer says, we really didn't have her back. The school didn't have her back. The mother said no one had her back. She was on the news how no one had her back. And so, okay, no one has your back, go commit suicide. What are you teaching them? What are you teaching them? And then how come, why did no one email you back? I mean, the superintendent should have responded. Or the assistant superintendent should have responded. Not just Mrs. Wall yelling at me on the phone, how come I didn't go to her directly? I told her, I said, I didn't go to you directly because last year I dealt with you with an incident and you were reactive the whole time. I had to have a police officer come to the building.
I'm just gonna stop you because you can certainly make comments about curricular issues or comments, but you need to not make it the person specific. This is not the forum or venue to do that.
Okay, so then what would you like me to say?
I would like you to make an appointment with me, which you have not thus done.
No, because I emailed you twice and I have both emails and you didn't get back to me. Isn't that your job to get back to the parent?
You and I spoke on the phone about two separate issues.
Okay, no, we spoke on an issue the first year, last year when my daughter was in 6th grade about a death threat. I didn't speak to you this year about this. I emailed you about this.
I'm gonna ask you,
all
just
of you,
tone it down just a little
and
bit.
did not get a
okay?
response. That's why I'm here, for the response. Because I sent 2 emails and didn't get a response.
You are welcome to make an appointment with me. I can certainly address some of your concerns in general. If you have specific concerns about staff members, this is not the venue. The venue is to sit down and make an appointment with me.
No, the issue is, what are you teaching my kids and why are you having these assemblies?
That I'll be glad to respond to. I'm
Well,
correct.
I asked twice and I didn't get a response.
And I responded to the board and I responded to Mrs. Wall. The video that you're referring to was never shown in our auditorium.
No, it was told to be, they were
May I
told to
finish?
go
I'm
and watch it.
respectful with letting you finish. The video that what you were referring to was never shown in the auditorium. The sexting requirement is a requirement that we have to educate students on social media dangers at least annually. We often invite speakers in. This is no different in terms of people that have experience with sexting, sexting laws, sexting crimes, and things that happen in the present day, as you very clearly articulated earlier. I believe the video that you're referencing was looked up after your child went home and discovered additional information about the situation that occurred. That
No.
video was not shown or previewed.
It wasn't previewed. Mrs. Wall said it wasn't previewed, but Mrs. Wall admitted that they were told to go home and watch it if they wanted to.
It was never shown here.
Oh, so that's your scapegoat out, is because you didn't show it. They were just told to go watch it.
I don't know what there was to preview. And so you did reference Mr. DeVico did send out a notice in his weekly updates that he sends out to parents about the presentation and does so regularly about presentations that are coming up, of which you are able to opt out if you choose not to have your children participate in, but we are required to offer them annually.
Yes, but aren't you offered to tell us exactly what's going to go on, not just a simple sentence, having an assembly on sexting, having an assembly on.
I'm gonna cut this off now.
social media?
She offered to schedule an appointment. Please
So-
take advantage of it.
Going to-
This is back and forth right now.
But I wasn't responding.
I know, well, you addressed, she just said,
Why did
schedule
you
an
send it to me
appointment.
twice? That's my question. Like, I
Well-
emailed you twice and I didn't get something back. You're supposed to be the superintendent.
Did you not hear what you just
master
said?
of the school and you didn't get back to me. That's why I'm here, because I didn't get back to you.
She just said she's going to schedule something with you.
But why,
Okay, we're not gonna have a back and forth right now.
but why should I have to come here to get that?
I
Why couldn't
don't
she
know.
have emailed back? That's what I'm asking her. Why couldn't you have emailed back either time? You saw the email.
I did, and both situations I referred back to the building, which is why Mrs. Wall called you. You were unsatisfied with that response.
Yeah, because she's reactive, not proactive. She's horrendous.
You typically go back to the building where the issue occurred. And if you are unsatisfied with that response, that is when you come to me as the supervisor of the people that you're referring to.
So the first sentence of my second email says, I recently spoke with Mrs. Wall, who was quite upset I didn't follow up with her directly. So I did follow up with her and now I'm emailing you again because obviously I'm unsatisfied. I have questions in this email.
Would you like to make an appointment with?
Yeah, let's make an appointment. That would be great.
When we get done this, are you staying this evening?
No, I'm not saying.
Okay, well then I will step in the hall and we'll make an appointment with you.
That's great.
All right, I guess we can move on.
Yeah, there's no other.
Yep.
Seeing no others.
Seeing none. 2.1 curriculum, let's see, okay. We have no curriculum and building issues today. Policy 3.01. Is that you, Troy?
That is me. First, welcome to the new year, everyone. Policy, we're moving forward with our review of the 100 level policies. As promised at the December meeting, I have a few here for you this evening for first reading. The first thing in first reading is the Principles of Governance and Leadership. PSBA puts out updated principles of governance and leadership periodically, which are to be adopted by the school board. It's there for your review, not only as an action item on 301, but also as an update to a policy in 011. Additional policies that were sent in a board summary update to you last Friday is 126 class size, 127 assessments, 130 homework, 138 language instruction, educational placement for English learners, 140 charter schools, 142 migrant students, and 150 Title I comparability of services. Each of these policies have been reviewed compared to the PSBA template that was provided to us in terms of update to current law, federal and state law and requirements. The changes were summarized, like I mentioned last Friday. There are a few of them that do have changes. However, 138, 140 were fine and did not need additional changes. So I'll take any questions that you may have on it or on the summary that I provided last Friday.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask about the policies. I ought to know this, but I don't remember. Under the class size policy, at the end of the policy, we have a range of enrollment. And I guess my question is, why do we have a range instead of just maximum?
This was a local language that was adopted. This is not a range set by PSBA. This was a board adopted range.
Yeah, those
It
are
is
the
up.
ranges, I understand that.
It can be if the board decides to do a threshold versus a particular range. I think that maybe at the time I wasn't here, I would surmise that maybe you were trying to set a floor and a ceiling for each of the class sizes. That could be one of my
Yeah,
guesses,
and
but
I
I don't know the history. I'm
I
sorry.
can't remember why either, but
It was set pre-made, so I think 2008 was the time in which you set the class size ranges.
yeah.
So I
Because the
don't,
bottom number doesn't really mean anything. I mean, if we have below the bottom number, there's no action
Better.
required.
I said all the better.
Yeah. But, I don't know. I would just suggest putting a maximum number on there and not a range, because the ranges, to me, begs the question, why is there a range?
Yeah, I mean, my only other thought with a range would, and we would never do this, would be to prevent any type of skewing of class sizes. Like we couldn't have a class size at Northwestern that was 14. And a like size at North Weisenberg at maybe 18, instead of how we move students around the balance
Okay.
and
well,
keep
that
within
makes
that
sense.
range.
Yeah,
That would be my only thought behind that. But if the board's desire is to remove the lower
I mean,
range.
the
and keep
downside of
maximum.
the upper, just having it like 22, right, does that become a rule, not a guideline, right? That's my only. So
Well,
like, okay, we have 23, are we adding a teacher, are we adding a class for that one?
and we've done that, and
Yeah.
fifth grade was an example of that, so we use this as a guideline. And so once we start to exceed that guideline, Mrs. Holman and the principal will take a look at the makeup of that class. The students that comprise it and make some determinations of whether or not we need to split that into like, in this example, a third section. And then obviously they have budgetary repercussions, and then that's presented to the board at an exec session typically for your consideration as we make an adjustment with staffing.
Yeah,
So we know that that's a threshold and we work our best to keep within that, but once we think instructionally, educationally, that's not appropriate anymore, we'll come to the board with a recommendation.
all right, okay. Makes sense. I don't remember why we did it.
I don't remember, and on both sides, we've had class size guidelines that have either been less than and or exceeded. We usually try to highlight them on that May presentation in red, so you know that they are something that's outside the class size guidelines, but one over or one under doesn't mean a reduction of a teacher or an out of a teacher. It's about the makeup of the students and the recommendation of the principal and myself to you at that May board meeting.
Yeah, I don't expect we should change anything. It's just a question. The other one I had was under homework. It doesn't look like we changed a whole lot of that policy, but the second bullet says the term is not necessary to define in the policy. Is that just a technicality?
Yeah, so the definition that was previously adopted in 2006 had language in there that necessarily isn't relevant to today's standards. I'll give you an example. It said, it may not, and it's talking about the definition of homework and what can constitute homework, right? And so it said it may include not only written work, but also related activities such as television programs, reading for recreation, visiting historical sites. It just gave like different examples. And so the working definition itself wasn't necessary. It hasn't been a part of a board policy recommendation for PSBA for some time and no longer needed. So anytime there's language that may not necessarily be needed or required in a policy,
Okay.
We'll extract it out.
Okay.
Can I, since we're talking homework, not to interrupt you, you took mine too, so that's good, good time. The word broaden areas of interest, so anything in red, or sorry, green is the addition or correction.
That's correct.
So broaden areas, so is that language recommendation? And I'm asking this only because, and I've communicated this with Mrs. Holman, I've had some concerns about things that have been introduced, recommended for reading that may or may not have been necessarily tied to the curriculum. So I worry that this language allows for a lot of I guess delegation by the teacher that may not necessarily be aligned to the curriculum that we're teaching. I worry. I'm trying to be as
Allowing them to use their professional expertise.
correct. I am. However, some things have come to light. So I worry when we use the word broaden that it allows things to happen that we may not be aware of. Just fine.
Yeah, I guess it's a good point, right? Because you just use an example, if it's a math class and we decide, the teacher decides that to broaden their interests, right, could be English assignment, could be anything, right? This is very open-ended, right? It's supposed to say deepen, right, versus broaden, right? Like, is the purpose of an individual, academic area, is that area's purpose to broaden their interest, or is it to actually deepen their interest in that particular, like, because to me, broaden areas of interest through enrichment, I get your point, it's completely open, like, I can give you homework on any particular topic area whatsoever, or is a math professional going to give math related curriculum? 99% of the time, yes, probably, right? I don't know, it's a good challenge point.
I mean, Dr. Stone will have to respond to if broaden was a PSBA recommended suggestion, but certainly if you wish to be more specific about deepen in terms of it saying in the subject area, I mean, I'll just respond to what Mrs. Senovitis said. there are lots of things that classroom teachers use in their professional expertise that might not be something that the board particularly approves. In specific to homework, I gather that it should be deepening something that's been previously taught. But there are lots of things our teachers utilize in terms of current events or newspapers or library books or, you know, excerpts from readings, etc., that are used due to the professional expertise. The teaching is an art, not necessarily, you know, just repetitive, but I agree that deepen could potentially narrow the focus to being something that's already been taught. You'll have to, I don't know if Broaden was a PSBA suggestion or not.
Are we tied to what PSBA tells us? So this is the opportunity
No.
where we can use other language.
Yeah.
That's the will, yeah.
Yeah, they provide recommendations to us.
Mhm.
And then, you know, we evaluate them as a team and then bring the recommendations review for consideration. I do see merit in deepening versus broadening. I will say that if you look a little bit further down into under the guidelines in the second one, it does say homework shall complement the classroom instruction. So when you talk about broadening, it's broadening within that scope of that classroom instruction, within that approved curriculum, and not going outside those guidelines of that. So if I was in a math class and I'm looking at the Fibonacci sequence, I might say, look at some of the things in nature that like references the Fibonacci sequence, like sunflowers and stuff like that. Now, I might not take instructional time to do that, but that might be you know, a content area that I want my students to have a deeper understanding of that instruction, that content.
Principle.
Right, within the confines of that, you know, that approved curriculum that the board had passed. But I also see deepening the area. I think it's almost deepening and broadening to me is not synonymous. It almost could be both, broaden and or deepen areas of interest. But, you know, if the board had a preference one way or the other, you know, we would gladly entertain, you know, making an adjustment to the language.
Well, part of enriching in the content area is specific when you're looking at, let's say, an elementary classroom and you have 5 different levels of needs in the room. What you're teaching is the same, but the steps to get that deepening are different. So I mean, I just think that word really opens up a potential problem, and we are deepening an understanding of the content in which we approve. So that's what we're doing. So I do agree with the word change.
And homework in most cases should be that. It should be something that's been previously taught that requires studying, repetition, reinforcement, some deepening of the understanding of it so that it is obviously able to be recalled at a later time. That's the purpose of homework.
So I hear 2 folks suggesting maybe deepening being a more appropriate term.
I actually just had a question too. Do we have any homework guidelines? Like, meaning like time limits or areas, like, you know, how much kids should be getting of homework? Like,
In the previous policy, it did outline for the elementary levels as just an example. Here are some example guidelines, but again, they were just like, even the language itself said it wasn't meant to be necessarily the rule of thumb. But like, here's how, as you go up in age, the rigor of the homework may increase the time at home to take you to do it. So maybe at kindergarten, you're doing 20 minutes of homework. First grade, maybe like 25.
Okay.
They did provide it as an example, but they removed that example too, just because, again, it was not necessarily, policies are anchored typically in law and requirements. Stuff like that is built upon procedures and practices that we have you know, institutionally put in place.
excellent. I just wanted to say that I do agree with the wording change on that. I think that teachers are professionals and they do have an expertise. However, I also think that they need to be tying that expertise into the curriculum that was board approved. So I think if we're giving topics that aren't necessarily related to what they're teaching, then that's a problem and that's something that we need to discuss. So maybe, I don't know if we need to look at the curriculum policy, but that may be something to further look at since this kind of ties to it and make sure that that wording complements one another and that it's the same. But I think that that's where we're trying to say that we need to protect the wording a little bit, because the last thing that we want are for topics to be introduced that aren't aligned with our curriculum, which then could potentially cause issues later.
So I have for number 2, deepening areas of interest through enrichment.
And I think you're right, the complement classroom instruction is down below, which is fine.
Yeah, and that's where if we, an example would surface. And we did not meet this guideline, we would, professionally take a recourse, so.
All right, good. Any other comments on any of the other?
One other, it's more a question on migrant students. There's a particular ad that says the district shall provide materials to parents and guardians regarding their role in improving the academic achievement of their child. Does that statement show up here uniquely from other guidelines throughout the overall policy manual? Or like, why, it seems like it stands out to me that was added just to the migrant students policy as opposed to maybe a general policy.
Oh, yeah, that
See what
could
I'm
be
saying?
across the board, that
Right, like
doesn't necessarily apply to just migrant
Shouldn't
students, it
that
could be all
be-
students.
Yeah.
Or is it because you have to provide it in different
I
languages?
don't know, it doesn't specify that.
That's the intent, I take
You
it
think
as,
that's the
when
intent?
when you look at migrant students, there's a high likelihood that there's students that have English as a second language. And not necessarily have access to the same level of content in our website and some other areas, so providing materials that would allow them to improve that academic achievement, understand better what we offer here as a school district is the intent that I believe it is. This was a recommendation from PSBA to add that in, and that's how I interpreted that.
It sounds like these materials would be specific to a migrant student and not the general population.
Yeah, and
I don't know if we have these, but
Yeah.
since they were combined.
and materials could be social services too, and other resources that we have outside of here that help support migrant families that are coming here. It's not just necessarily
Paper.
anchored
Yeah.
into like academic achievement. Somebody may be housing insecure, somebody may be food insecure, all of those type of things that may provide barriers for a migrant child coming here.
Maybe we should say resources.
Maybe resources
Mhm.
instead of material.
That's a good point, yeah.
So I have the district shall provide resources.
On this one, when I was looking at it, I don't know if we've ever had a situation where we've had migrant students coming through here, have we? We have.
Yeah, I would just like to go back to the resources, because resources says, allocation of stuff, not material. So just be cautious about resource. When we talk about resources, we provide things to children, and
Yeah,
it says something slightly different than material. So I just.
Services
Say,
associated with
That's
Well,
now that you've said that.
literature.
versus
state provide direction.
provide direction, guidance.
Yeah.
Resources just says a financial responsibility to provide stuff
You're right.
versus, I read that as like I'm gonna call it a booklet, some kind of material.
Maybe materials and guidance, that's not bad.
Great.
But I'm
I
sorry, I
I
didn't
tell you what,
interrupt
let me talk to Luann, let me look at a couple other school district policies that were related to this, and I can come back to you. Next month with, suggested language change if need be.
I just quick tried to look at the school code to see if it was
It-
in there. and I-
It's not, and it's provided again. Yeah, let me take a look at it and bring it, if you don't mind, to the next meeting, and we'll say whether or not.
But Bill, I don't want to
What
interrupt
that
your
should be
thought,
adjusted.
because you were going somewhere with the. I went back to the resources, but you were going somewhere with.
Oh, I said just instruction or direction.
Okay.
So that's an ad that PSBA is recommending for that policy.
Yeah.
Do they have resources to say why they recommend that?
Yeah, I
ad?
could, yeah.
For
That's
clarifications?
my first step is going to email them.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, what are you doing to me? I'm gonna ask them, just give me further clarification on what they mean by that.
Okay,
I do see Mrs. Holman's point with resources, when we write resources, that we're providing that maybe something that has some financial, ties to it versus a material like a trifold, like, hey, go contact this on, this individual on your own. Let me do a little further digging. I'll come back with updated recommendation on that one.
and this is just the first reading, so we are not even taking action on the next one, so.
Yeah, I do want to go back on this point though, because I think it's important. If I replaced one of our guidelines and it said the district program for all students shall include procedures too. Are these policies consistent with what we provide all students, or are these unique to just the migrant family? In other words, if I take number 4, providing parents or guardians an opportunity for meaningful participation in the program. Do we do that for all students for our current policies? Or is this trumping something that we don't provide all students?
We provide that to all students.
Okay.
However, per law, there are very specific laws relative to migrant students.
Okay.
And so they reinforce those points
In a
these
specific
type of policy.
Okay.
It's not to suggest that we are not doing that for the rest of the population and they're getting some additional benefit. It's really just to call out that, these migrant students, even though they may be transient, they're coming in and out of your district, they're still afforded the same level of access as everybody else.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, the fact of the matter is that we have to have a policy for migrant students,
Correct.
right? It's to the point that they're a student, right? And so it's applicable to all students.
Yeah, I could argue though, it's just another policy that is redundant with an
Yes.
existing policy because,
That's what
but that's fine.
obviously it seems like it's required by law.
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't have this and that we didn't have that law, the district and the school board of directors could basically suggest that we don't have to educate these students coming in. We could say, okay, you're not maybe a US citizen, you're not a member of our home district, a slew of different reasons. This requires us to educate migrant students.
Yeah, we have tuition students and
Yeah.
we have policies about buying houses and this. When I was reading this, I was thinking of, the busloads of the illegal immigrants that are coming in and distributed around the country. And what if we get a busload up here, one of our churches is gonna take them in, and now we have an illegal immigrant or an undocumented immigrant, or what they call them.
Just to educate them, right?
Do we have policy for that, or where does this page stand?
This, as well as anyone fleeing like from refugee, you must educate them, and there are different requirements of what paperwork you can require of them.
But they have to reside in the district, correct? Is that?
They have to reside somewhere in the district, but you have to remember sometimes those situations are temporary because of their status.
And
Will they be
hopefully
deemed
it's on the
homeless?
Weisenberg side where we have capacity.
And all
We can bus them there.
if you take
What was your question?
Well, would they fall under homeless?
Maybe. So homeless is really, as you know, really specific about the reason why one fled. And the reason why one doesn't have a home. So I think it depends on the reason.
the event.
It's the event that precipitated the lack of housing.
Yeah.
So they could be covered under multiple things. It could be a student who is a refugee, it could be a migrant student, it could be a homeless student.
Well, my thought was reading this, are we prepared for that in the event we get a family or two?
Well, I will just suggest that we are legally not allowed to ask them if they're an illegal immigrant or not. So that's like protected.
Then they'd be homeless.
Well, that they
Yeah.
establish resident, like how does that, mean, how does that work in the event if, you know, a new child shows up tomorrow for the
Yes, so-
elementary school?
So with the homeless situation, Ms. Stitzel is our homeless liaison, and she has a process that she goes through to evaluate, to make a determination whether or not a child's homeless.
Hmm.
In this migrant situation, the definition of a migrant student is that clearly defined in that policy. And you could think about our community, we are highly agricultural, and, you know, if you were, you know, somebody who needed seasonal work that came in and maybe picked pumpkins or something like that, you know, they would fall underneath this. They could come in and tell us, hey, you know, we're living at the motel down the street, and we need to educate our kids for the 3 months that we're here picking pumpkins, and we cannot ask them whether or not then, you know, they're, you know, do you have, you know, citizenship? That's just not something we're permitted to do. So,
Are we prepared now? But this has happened in many districts. I mean, even as simple as when there were tsunamis or hurricanes and things, and there were large influx of people who were fleeing from natural disasters. And so you become prepared, or you add teachers, or you do whatever it is that you need to do to educate the students who show up at your door.
Are those the only two classes, really, homeless and migrant? Refugee.
yeah, and we have other policies that define who's an eligible student here,
Yeah.
based on residency and all that other type of stuff.
Last point, sorry.
Oh, I stacked my papers, Todd.
No, it's just, and I don't, this is obviously their wording, but it feels a little outdated to talk about seasonal and temporary employment in agriculture, fishing, dairy, and food processing when we have temporary and seasonal warehouse employees in our district. So is this a very particular guideline around migrant status that only relates to agricultural, fishing, dairy, and food, or does Amazon warehouse not apply?
Yeah, I think that definition is a legal definition.
Legal definition.
Yeah, and I will verify that. I'm not gonna be able to verify it this second, but I will verify that and bring it forward.
Thank you.
And bring that forward. But yeah, I believe that's a legal definition. Most definitions, when they come into policy, they'll be a legal definition. And that one has remained unchanged since 2006, which also insinuates to me that it's still the current legal definition of migrant.
Okay, anything more? All right, well, we'll see that back in 2 weeks.
I do have a question on charters.
Oh, is that on here? Okay, yeah, I wasn't negating it or limiting it to just that one, anything in policy, so. not a
Do
joke.
you want the answer to the migrant question before you move to the next one?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So part of this is in law, the program definitions are agricultural work or employment, fishing work or employment. An agricultural migratory worker, a migratory fisher. It appears to be very specific. Now, it does say here, which is something Dr. Snow will have to check on, seasonal employment that occurs only during a certain period of years because of cycle of nature. And by nature, it may not be continuous or carried on throughout the year. I don't know that the warehouse work is cyclical by nature.
No, it is cyclical by nature. It follows this seasonal,
But
not nature meaning outdoor nature, but the nature
Like,
of the business
like
is very
Christmas
seasonal.
time.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, this,
But yes.
if you're making a policy change and there's an adjustment to be made, now's the time.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Batson, you're
No,
on
no,
Charter 12.
Mine are just two clarifications. Board of trustees of a charter school shall be classified as a public official,
There,
and they fill out all of the same.
when they follow the rules, they do.
Okay. And I'm assuming I know the answer to this question, but I'm just checking. The board shall work cooperatively with individuals and groups submitting proposals and applications for charter schools. That's not an individual, that is a charter school who's moving into our area.
Show me where are you?
Second paragraph.
Second paragraph from the top, it's really a sentence. Under purpose.
The Pennsylvania School Board of Directors shall evaluate applications submitted for charter schools located within the district. That one? Shall, that one, shall work collaboratively with individuals, groups, making proposals and application. Yes, you can't submit, well. You can't submit an approved proposal to a school district unless you're located in the boundaries. You can submit a proposal for a cyber school that has not have a location. So yes, it wouldn't come to us though, it would go to the state. We would work collaboratively with individuals and groups that would be submitted proposals and applications. They only will be received by the district if they are within our district boundaries.
Good.
There are applications filed regularly for charter schools that are not located and are granted that we also have to work collaboratively with, that are granted by the state, that are statewide charter schools. And all of the charter schools, whether they're statewide or physical locations or otherwise, just like all of you have to fill out the form, the ethics form, when they are appearing on the board or in the year that forth after, have to fill out the ethics statement. Yeah.
What threw me off was the word individual, said cooperatively with individuals.
Well, an individual,
And groups.
an individual can start a
Charter.
school. So there have been some in the Lehigh Valley that have been started by a singular individual.
All I had.
Thanks. Any others on any other policies? Or ones we've already discussed? Okay. Like I said, this will come back in 2 weeks, so if there's any comments or questions, we can further discuss. Okay, 3.03, none at this time, the second reading, 3.04, rescind policies, nothing there, 3.05, nothing there, for updates requiring action, so we'll move into operations, 4.01, Kissel O'Brien Fire Protection.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. This is our fire protection annual renewal for our inspections, and this is a 3-year renewal for our inspections for the next 3 years of our fire systems throughout the district wide. So every building that has a fire system has to get inspected yearly, and this is who does it for us. And this price was shopped, so it's competitive.
Okay, so standard, nothing new,
Nothing new,
okay,
just a different company for the past 2 years.
gotcha. Anybody have any questions?
So 3-year contract, but this is the year price.
Per year.
This is
price.
per year price.
Yeah,
Okay.
and locked us in for 3 years, yes. And it was reviewed by police.
Thank you. Okay, 4.02 operational information updates. None at this time. Takes us to district finances, 5.01, Act 1 resolution.
Correct. So from our discussions last month with the budget, we had recommended that in the month of January that we approve the resolution for the Act 1 index. The resolution is just that we're going to stay within the 4.1 increase. Doesn't mean we have to go to that 4.1 increase. It's just for us, January is the deadline in order for the state to go through our process with the budget. So this is the resolution that would have to be approved on the January meeting. And the other attachment is just what PDE requires us to send with that resolution. It's proving that we would not increase taxes higher than 4.1. It's not set in stone. It's just the preliminaries, just showing that we would not go above the 4.1.
And we will take action on that in 2 weeks. Is everybody comfortable with that and understanding of what that is? Thank you. 5.02 Tax Collection Committee Delegate.
Correct. So back in 2008, Governor Rendell enacted Act 32, which was the elimination of all townships, EIT collection agencies. So the TCC was started because of it being consolidated. So everyone in Lehigh County, all school districts in Lehigh County and the municipalities are together as a committee for the collection of EIT taxes, which they have appointed Berkheimer to do. And everyone has to have a representative. It's always been the business administrator and the accounting specialist. So since we've had the employment changes in our department, we just have to get approval to move myself, who was the alternate delegate, to the delegate, and Christy as the alternate for the committee.
I don't think anybody has any objections to that. Okay. 5.03 Iron Pigs Agreement.
Correct. So back prior to COVID, our middle school emotional support class would always take the class to an Iron Pigs game. So now that we're allowed to go on field trips again, they would like to start going back to the Iron Pigs for that class. Because they never got to go in 2020, we do have a credit. So that would support part of the cost for this field trip.
Not that it's a lot of dollars, but how is that funded?
This is paid through general fund because it is for a class.
Okay. Questions? 5.04 Community Education Classes.
So there's only one class being offered this spring. Yeah, yoga's out, melt is in.
Yeah.
No, that's
Somebody else?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right.
Maybe it's hot yoga. You're melting?
Oh,
You're melting off.
I would say.
It's hot yoga.
In the boardroom.
It's a location.
You don't have a hot yoga place.
Oh, let's see, 5.05. Clinical affiliation agreement with Wilkes University on behalf of its Hassan School of
I
Nursing.
was Googling Melts and all I got was a restaurant.
Yes.
This is an agreement, a clinical affiliation agreement with Wilkes University School of Nursing for students pursuing certification as certified school nurses.
This is the first time we're doing this? I don't recall this.
It is, with Wilkes, yes, they got a large grant for a really fun endowment of $3.3 million for their nursing program.
Wow,
From a businessman in Wilkes-Barre.
okay,
So they are pursuing expanding their nursing program.
good. Well, I guess we just take advantage of the free labor, if you will. To a certain
And our
extent.
nurses give them a really good experience.
All right, 5.06 Sweet Stevens, Katz and Williams Agreement.
Mrs. Edmonds is on, I believe.
Yes. Yes, sorry for my froggy voice here, everyone. We're looking for approval for contracting with Sweet Stevens for special education legal advice. The contract amounts are listed in both contracts you see in the agenda item there. We do have 2 years, and the reason for that is based on the timeline for the specific case. I can answer, or I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have that wouldn't violate confidentiality if you do have any, but ultimately we're seeking your approval to work with Sweet Stevens for the special education legal advice.
Anybody have any questions?
I sent you a more detailed update, but certainly if there's any other questions that we can answer, we will. Just the same agreement we have had in the past for legal consultation for a firm.
Are the terms looking exactly the same? Are they exactly the same agreements, prices and all that?
Yes.
Sorry, they are. It's just the two fees are different for 2 different years. Sorry, Andrea.
That's okay.
Okay, no questions. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you.
Well, that takes us to 5.07 reports.
Just a little highlights. Our revenues are still up for real estate taxes. Not as much as we'd like, but we're still ahead. Federal revenue is up, and the reasoning is the state has given us our money that was owed to us for the 21-22 school year for ESSER funds that we had expended. So we did that final recap for the 21-22. So they gave us our money for that. EIT collections is down slightly this month. For November. 58,000. It's coming up slowly. And expenditures are relatively the same as they were the year before. Electricity is slightly down from last year, November 21. Any question?
Anyone?
So I have a question, but I think it falls under old business. It's related to the bills from December. Do you want it under old business?
It doesn't matter, we just have to pull them up.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, since we're on the reports.
I did. Certificates were on this. So. Okay, let's not talk about- Disclaimer, I'm joking. So I had an opportunity to kind of really go through, some of the things when you look through are very vague, so descriptions, so it, you know. We all don't know, you might know who they are, but we don't know what they are, what they're for. In particular, the procurement card purchases. Things like Italian Delight and Katie's and Days Inn and things like that. It doesn't have like what they're affiliated with.
Correct.
So how do
So-
we know? And then my question would be the funding, is that general fund? Where is that coming from?
So Katie's, I can tell you, is pizzas being bought for the stadium. So that comes out of Tiger Concession.
Okay.
What was the other one?
Italian Delight.
Italian.
These are just examples.
Yeah, sure.
I think Mr. Lizer brought this up before too at the last meeting.
Well,
Samsung, huh?
But yeah, about something like that.
sort of the same kind of
Yeah.
question, there's some sort
No
of
details.
breakdown.
Well, and Christy pulled from Amazon, I think what Todd needs, but it's not gonna answer
Yeah.
the what was it for?
Mhm.
I think he was getting at, are we buying a lot of one product or thing that we should be able to get more competitive than at Amazon?
Right.
That's not gonna tell you what it's for. So we do have our yearly report that I'm gonna send you on Friday that Christy pulled from our Amazon account. It's not, I don't know, it's gonna give you what you want, because it puts it in like beauty supplies and classroom
I think it's
supplies.
that.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And the other. The other downfall of the report is. If it's one order and they shipped it like 10 separate orders, they didn't break it down like shipment one costs $25 and shipment two costs $35. It's the whole order.
Is
So,
lumped together.
is
so you
lumped
can't
together,
see
so
what
you-
those
yeah.
thing was.
Correct.
But Mrs. Simmons, if you have specific questions, usually Mrs. Steigerwald brings with her the detailed report. I don't know if she
I
has the
can-
one from December with her, but she can answer if there's ever any questions that you see. We can either before the meeting, look into what it was if we don't know, and sometimes she has a detailed report about what fund that she could tell you what it was for.
Yeah, I just pulled examples. I'm not nitpick, I guess I'm nitpicking-ish. It doesn't feel transparent to me, that's all. So,
So, oh, sorry, go ahead. I wanted to follow up on something you were saying.
yeah, so I just, when we look back, Amazon, I agree with Todd and I agree with him before, but I think when you start to see these $34, $58, and some of it could be tied to a training, right? So you send someone to a training and there's, dinner or meal fees, mileage. And not that I need to know what specific individual it's tied to, but it would be helpful if it was. And I know it's a lot of work, and maybe no one else agrees with me, but pizzas for football game, like I just.
A little more detailed.
It just feels very vague, and I would hate to see us in a situation where we're not transparent about that, especially on that kind of card. Where we could potentially be questioned more often than we are, because it feels ambiguous to me. That's just my opinion.
Let me tell you how the procurement card kind of works, because people just don't have cards they can go
I know.
charge with. And so the oversight piece of, should someone be in possession of a card, and there's a form that they need to fill out to one, get the card, and what they want to expend it on, to the point where there's limits on the card that they can't exceed. So we have that, I'll say, oversight on the front side. That doesn't help you in terms of your transparency for what it was for. we use the procurement card often, one, because it's easy, two, because it's fast, and three, because there is some sort of percentage we get back on using the procurement card that Christy might or might not, off the top of her head, I'll tell you what that is. But we have ordinarily used the procurement card for those things. When you're talking about days in, my guess would be either a conference or a sports team, same as your Italian delight, because most of the time when you go to a conference, the person paying and asking for reimbursement, and you wouldn't know that whether it was a PO written to Italian Delight or it was a procurement card for Italian Delight, and whichever way it was used. The oversight comes on the fact that we allow that card to be used for that purchase. That they physically are in possession of the card to do that, because there's a limited number of cards that they have to tell you what they're going for to check the card out, if that makes any sense. There's not just cards that people are in possession of. But you might know the percentage, and if you don't, you can get back to them. And you might know the answer to the two questions she asked.
Yeah, so the Italian Delight was for cross-country states. And the days in was also for cross-country states. So, in the bill section, there is a procurement, it just lists the date and the vendor and the dollar amount. So would you like another column on there?
So I'm not looking for additional
Like,
work. I'm
You know,
just,
like to say that it's Tiger concession, like it's
Is
associated
that
with
data
Tiger.
that's already there and it's just a printing the report or?
Or is it a manual process?
It's a manual process.
She
It's
has-
us reconciling the procurement card to make sure everything is correct. And nothing was fraudulently charged.
Yeah, she cross-checks the papers that we get when someone uses it and what they told us they were going to use it for with the actual receipt and then subsequently the statement. There's not a non-manual way. Without, I mean, the list that if you see what she has, when she brings the board meetings, it's handwritten on there when there's big expenses or something that is out of the ordinary, so she would be able to answer your questions. But
Is there
not
a-
an account
is there a-
or something.
Do you do a time, like a period of time where you say, here's the value of the papers I've received,
So every month,
$10,000.
the procurement card is just like any other personal credit card. We get a monthly statement where we have a bill that we have to pay, and it lists every charge that was done. So then we reconcile that statement every month because we have to charge the correct accounts for the purchases
Yeah.
that were made.
You're doing that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have all the paperwork in the office as to who specifically purchased something. I mean, my spreadsheet here that I have account code, so like you asking what days in, I just look at, I can tell you, you know, it was cross country at states.
Does the person that uses the credit card, after they use their credit card, they submit a receipt? Is there another form they fill out with it and say?
Yes.
That's kind of what.
And that's what they send, yeah, and when an individual does get the okay from their supervisor to use the credit card, they have to fill out a form saying. Another form saying, these are the rules of the district credit card, and do you abide by them, and.
Oh, like once a year they do that.
Right.
Yeah.
When they. take
But
the
every
credit card.
expense that they do, they have a form that they kind of
Correct.
complete and it kind of explains
Correct,
why they're buying this
Mhm.
item. or
yes.
food.
So absent of like all that, I'll just say extra work, is there something that maybe we would like to see? You know, or is that what they explained enough? You know, satisfaction, I mean, part of me is thinking that in your general summary. You know, maybe you can highlight like, hey, you know, the track team, and maybe it's so minuscule, it doesn't matter, but just using that as an example, say, hey, track team, the football team, so and so, they went to states and during that trip, you know, we incurred expenses for the activities associated with that, out to eat, hotel, etc. It doesn't tie it to one, but you know, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I mean, if they're
Something,
big purchases or I'll say odd things by name, like that might appear, we could probably list them on the monthly report. If, I just don't know that we're gonna pick the right things. Like, well, I don't know that the
Yeah,
things
right.
we're gonna select are gonna be, and if you have questions, certainly at any time, Christy can tell you what it's for. And pull the account
Maybe-
code and go pull the paperwork. Like, we have that
Maybe-
backup documentation in our
Um,
files.
maybe breaking it down by the card, like, so like I have a Tiger concession card that Jason has to purchase items for the stand. So anything that's associated right now, the procurement card spreadsheet report just goes by date. Maybe I keep it by credit card. Like the Tiger concession card, everything underneath there
That's only
and
gonna pull out
everything
Tiger
associated.
concessions.
What's that?
That's not, am I correct in saying it's only gonna pull out Tiger concessions, because everything
Right,
else
but-
is on the accounts payable card?
Different cards, yeah, like each card, like we have a student activity card. Where student council always buys Philly pretzels to sell in the student store. So those charges are all underneath the student activity card. We have an accounts payable 1 and 2 where that's where all your majority Amazon purchases. People going to conferences that have to book online, we use that card. I don't know.
Why don't, unless Jen has another, Mrs. Senator, can you print me what that would have looked like for December if you printed it by card? Not right now, I'm saying like for Friday,
Yeah,
not like right now,
can-
and
yeah.
have them take a look at that. But you were gonna say
Yeah.
something, Mrs.
So I don't want you to do all this work just for me. I can absolutely email you a specific question. So like, I'm not looking, but I'm just in the spirit of transparency. When you look through it and you start to see these random charges, right? And you don't understand, not that I don't per se, but you don't understand that process. Just feels questionable, and I'm not saying that it is. It just, because there's no like description tied to it, it's hard to figure out like, where does it come from and is it budgeted for, and those kind of questions arise. So really it's the board, and I'm one of 9. So if you feel you want more, great. If you don't, I'll just direct my individual questions to you.
Yeah, I mean, it is a will of the board question, but certainly the other option is Chrissy can just bring the binder so that she's ready to answer any individual questions on that month's documents. What do you?
The way I look at this procurement card issue is that, we had checks and balances already established within the administration for the, use of these cards. And, I think what I'm hearing is if those checks and balances are adequate and working, and we trust the people that are monitoring it, then I don't think that at a board level, we have to know what the individual expenditures are for. Unless, we feel it's getting out of hand and they're spending money on things that we shouldn't be spending money on.
Yeah,
Is that?
How do you know though, is what she's saying.
No, and we're in a deficit. So when we talk about money and we talk about saving money, and we start to go, well, where can we save money? So that's why I'm asking. So, I mean, I think it's safe to say, I don't believe, although I know personnel is the biggest expense, I don't always want that to be the option. I know it often is for obvious reasons. So I'm just looking at it from a realistic perspective. How do I know? And I'm not questioning anybody's ability here. I'm not saying anybody's stealing money or like, that's not my intent of this conversation. So my intent of the conversation is to 1, understand, 2, to have an open dialogue about what exactly is being spent. So when you look at saving money, you can actually talk about where does your money go? And that's why I hear what you're saying. I'm just trying to say, help us understand exactly where this money is going, that you don't see listed as a budget item, you see a generic budget item. So it's if you all want it that way, I'll just send you my question.
Sure.
And we'll leave it at that.
I see two steps. One is trust but verify. And verify is you've got a stack of documents that you go through on a monthly basis that says all of these documents add up to $12,800 on this procurement card. You have a procurement card. Do you see $12,800 or do you see $15,000? Because if you see $15,000, then you want to know that, because that's the fraud piece of this, right? So to me, the verification, at least of the process, to Bill's point, is you have a very specific process of documentation of every single expense. And presumably you're adding all that up. And if it's off, you're chasing. right? You
Correct.
would bring it to us if like, oh my God, something's on fire, right? The second part, though, I think speaks to the cost side of this. Is there a categorization of these expenses that we can get better transparency into? So we can start asking those questions to say, do we need to spend $40,000 a year on subs and pizzas, or is there another alternative to that?
So what would you like?
Number one, probably some validation of, here's my stack of procurement requests and here's my card summary. It's aligning, right? That's either an auditing step you go through every year with the auditors, right? They start picking and choosing things and they
Correct.
validate. Evidencing that to us in some monthly, quarterly, or annual way, right? That there's a checks and balances here. And then the transparency step sounds like maybe one of the first steps is something that gives us like the breakdown by category, right? Is this concession stand related? Is this, et cetera, right? And then you could start to say, okay, this is 80% concession stands. We dig into concession stand and we realize like, oh, they're buying hoagies for 50 cents and they're selling them for $2. All right, well, there's a revenue offset from, versus like, no, there's all these expenses that are just expenses for having parties.
Right, so Tiger is totally separate from the general
Yeah.
fund, so he has money in the account and that's all he has.
Yeah.
Student activities, they have their own separate accounts, so you would just be looking at like really accounts
General,
payable,
yeah.
the general fund stuff. And majority of general fund stuff is grant stuff that we're buying with grant money. When our teachers are approved for teacher mini grants, they typically go to Amazon to get their stuff for those mini grants. And majority of the conferences that people have been going to lately have been being covered under Title 1 or 2 federal programs.
Do you know offhand approximately how much we spend using procurement cards a year?
I would have to add that up. I know with Amazon, it was like 50,000 last year.
For the whole year, though.
Mhm.
And that's across the broad spectrum, meaning that some of it is tied to those grants.
Correct,
So it's not necessarily cost to us.
right, yeah.
But then there's a component that is a cost to us.
correct.
Which is less than the 50 grand.
Mhm.
I don't know, is there an easy way to kind of summarize maybe that piece of it? Maybe not at the detail level, but like a pie chart. Hey, we spent 50 grand, 55% of it was tied to, these little
Grants.
mini grants, so it's not a cost to the district, et cetera. I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm thinking out loud just to kind of, give us an idea of, so there's some comfort on where the money's going.
Do object code on like a pie chart or something?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the capabilities are of the.
Yeah, I mean, I could do it monthly, just a recap at the bottom of the procurement card listing, saying 40% is
Yes.
grant funds.
Yes.
2% is Tiger concessions, student activities.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to give you the information you want without a lot of manual input, and part of that is our job, part of it is our job to. We obviously, if there was any reconciliation issues, which never doesn't ever happen. I mean, I hear the other part of the transparency of trying to find out where the information is being spent, but some of that is. And I'll say in our control and some of it's not. So all the student activity stuff, even if you don't like it, it's being spent by student activity. Same thing in concession stand. Your hope is that anything that's being bought for the concession stand is profitable on the other side. Grant funds are an in and out. So you're getting money in for specific purposes and you're spending it in the expenditure side on those specific purposes. So that's why we've never looked in, to Mrs. Senovitis' point of areas to cut there on those things. They're not necessarily mostly general fund things that you're looking at that would even be an option to cut. But that being said, if you have individual questions about things, like Christy can always bring the binder with us. Let Christy and I put our heads together and see what we can come up with and put together on the bottom of a monthly report that's not manual intensive, because we just went back the other way of like, we took all, we don't want detailed reports, and now we have to figure out the happy middle of how do we get you something that is detailed enough that you understand, and as Todd says, trust but verify, but some of that is in our purview to be able to try to figure out.
What kind of work does the auditor do relative to the card? Does he have procedures when he's here? Does he focus in on that component in his audit?
He will pull 1 or 2 months of procurement card.
The whole month or just?
No,
sample?
he'll just ask for a
Sample within a
sample
month or
of,
two for the
yeah,
whole
like,
year.
this was on the January procurement card, Amazon for $500. Let me see your backup for it.
Okay, gotcha. And I think those missing items, if they were missing, he would clearly highlight that
Correct.
to us and he would
The
extrapolate.
checks and balances.
Yeah,
what he
that's
thought.
another
Yeah.
outside of the district check and balance, yeah.
The
Okay.
Follow-up though, because there's a separate set of card, I'm looking at art, because there's a fuel card that's separate from
That's
this.
totally separate.
Yeah.
Yes, that's WEX.
Yeah.
Sunoco.
Yeah, this is a general,
Yeah.
these are cards you can essentially use anywhere. The fuel cards are completely separate.
And each employee has their own independent PIN code that they have to use that card. So
And there's we talked about this before, but there's a process you go through
There is.
to validate all of those charges. So they're not
We
filling out there.
verified against the vehicle and then they verified against the.
So I'm not asking for anything. I will, if I have specific, and I am not. I have, as I've said openly about money, that is not my forte. But as we've continued to look at things, and if I never brought this up, I wouldn't have known what some of the expenses are in terms of grants and things like that. And so I feel like that, again, just clarifies some of what it's used for, some of where the fund comes. So I do appreciate that. So I'm definitely not looking for you to do more work.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, and if you see individual things that for whatever reason, or whatever Christy and I come up with to put on the bottom summary, we're never gonna pick. I'll say the right things. We'll try to pick the things that we think are big picture items or things that might draw questions. But if there's something that we don't highlight, or she will always be prepared to answer your question. If there's something you're like, what was that for? That's not out of the ordinary where individual questions about what, even on the bills. So not unique to the procurement card. Like, what was that $14,000 expense at XYZ? Because, there's tournament fees and there's some things on there that are certainly not able to be determined what they are even by the bill line item, let alone the procurement card. But that's part of where our checks and balances, but if there's certain things that you have questions about, please ask, we'll get you what you need.
Thank you.
I have one question for Art, back with the credit cards for the cars.
Yeah.
The tax exempt, this is the state sent us a check. How does that work?
That would be Christie.
So with us belonging to this WEX credit card, they handle we don't get the taxes.
Going
They
on
handle all-
that, takes it out,
yes.
so they don't give you a check.
Mhm. Right, prior to us not having the credit cards, we would fill out that
Right.
Form every year with the
So we're
state.
Getting that back.
So we just pay the net up.
Yeah, we'll pay the net.
The net.
And one question on, sorry,
No.
student activities report,
Mhm.
there's two accounts.
This morning.
I am in November.
Oh, you're right, November now?
Sorry.
That's right. I just want to know what's on.
November student activity, there's two accounts that are pretty large, the student council
Mhm.
and the yearbook. Presumably yearbook is basically the expenses of the actual yearbook.
Correct.
The student council, that number's pretty large at 23. What, we have a sense of what that budget is being used for?
Yeah, so student council is your student store and they handle basically everything in the high school as far as funding. What happens with class funds? So when a class graduates, they have a year to spend their money that's left in their student activity. If that money is not expended, it goes into the student council fund because student council helps everyone
Mhm.
in the high school. It's not a true specific account like yearbook.
For a select group of students.
Correct, for a select group of students.
So
So that's why it's.
have they been
larger.
carrying a balance?
Yes,
Is
all the
that,
student activities carry balances.
there probably should be a limit on that, right? On how much they carry in that fund. Is there not a limit on what we allow them to carry in that fund or what it's gonna be used for?
I would have to read that up.
Man, I thought I remember reading that at one point.
I don't know if there's a limit. What it's to be used for has to be voted on by the students at a
Students,
meeting. Then they need to send over the minutes of the approval by the group of what the expenditure is. Don't know that there's a limit on how much they can carry from year to year.
So you want
She
to
does.
spend money.
Well, you typically,
You want the
Yeah.
students. Yeah.
because you want the students that raise the money.
Yeah.
Spend.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a booster club should expend the majority of their money. So
And most.
those kids that raise that money benefited from that.
That is built up over years.
Yeah,
That money wasn't spent on the ones that didn't raise it.
Right, so that's
So
what
I would almost cap it as to how much you could.
that's
spend.
what I'm starting to. When you start seeing that big number, one group could decide, hey, we're gonna go to, we're gonna have a party.
We got 23.
So your main meaning, well,
How do we?
cap it, limited, I guess, yeah, I
I mean,
do.
Christmas procedures will have to look at the student activities, see if there's any limit. I mean, they often do events, like one of the most recent ones, got Gift of Giving, where students in the high school who were in need during the holidays, student council did a donation to that so that there were
Correct.
specific.
They did a
things,
large donation to make sure that all.
like a $5,000
Correct.
donation to make
Yes.
sure that all of
Every
the names
family
that were
had
submitted for Christmas.
substantial.
were- So that it went across the board for all
Correct.
of the students that had needs right before Christmas. So I think they are trying to expend some of it, but I don't know if there's a limit, but we do have student activity procedures we can look at.
So they don't all spend it all at once.
Right,
Yeah.
both ways, a limit on how
Yeah.
big that account. should
Both
look.
ways.
And also-
Makes sense.
January, we're approving a trip. to
Jason is on,
Bahamas.
Jason is on and asking to add something. Jason?
Yeah, I just want to give two reminders. Number one, thank you for the donation reminder that they gave 5,000. Additionally, the key piece of this is at the end of every class year, that money by state accounting laws must be spent down or deposited in student council. So that money is being drawn down, but every year, at the end of every 2 years, they get a deposit. Every year, they get a deposit from 2 years prior class treasury balance. So what we try to do now is we initiated the gift of giving, and they're going to be giving towards that. They purchase towards big things in the high school, those things that aren't budgeted for, but would be pretty cool to have. So they do spend that down, and this is not tax dollars. This is all fundraised money that the students have control over how it's spent, and they vote on that. So they have to provide minutes, they have to have a meeting to approve all those expenditures. So I just wanted to make those points to help clear some of that large balance out.
Thanks, Jason.
And I guess at the end of the day, if there's money left over by a class, they chose not to spend the money, right?
Yeah, and sometimes
But
we do
then-
like a memorial bench, like I think there's a few in front of the high school that have like donated from the class of. Sometimes they do a unique give back project, but sometimes they don't.
Out of sight, out of mind once they leave.
Yeah, we always keep a balance in that class treasury till all the expenses are paid. So sometimes it's a month or two till after all the graduation expenses are taken care of. A lot of times those come in below budget, and there's a balance there. It's not a large balance, because what the classes try to do is actually give back to the class members, or give a huge discount on prom. We were just able to have prom last year for the first time again. So again, those are some of the things. There's it has a little bit of a larger balance because we haven't been able to do much the past several years. Now we're kind of getting back into the flow this year.
Thank you.
I assume the same applies to yearbook then too.
Well, your book is a large expense and then a large payout too,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, that's an in and out, account. So you buy the yearbook, and that we will then cut a very large check to Jostens in roughly, I think like May or June, might be July even, once all the yearbooks have been purchased and distributed.
Like you're looking at a large amount, but it's because of the time of the year. So you want to
Yeah.
get an end of the year balance
That's what I'm
because it
figuring.
comes in and then it gets a large check written to Johnson's when we buy the yearbook.
So if we would look at the same report in
In
June,
May
you
or
would,
June, right.
should see a very low
Yeah.
dollar
whenever.
amount for yearbook.
And you'll see the expenditure. So in the column that identifies the expenditure, whatever month we write, the receipts and expenses for the payment to Johnson's and whatever month we make it to get the yearbook in.
Right, and your book does have extra money. Because they do buy new equipment every so often, so they do need money in that account for when their equipment does fail.
Okay, any more questions around the reports? Okay, thank you. Moving on, 5.08. Financial information updates not requiring board action, discussion on, if we would like, LTRI-C, LCPI, CLIU, or Gorman and Associates to present to us in the future.
So that's the board's option. So each one of those entities has a budget that they present to their JOC board member or Mrs. Kissler to the trustee. Do you wish, as the board members that hear that presentation, to represent that budget? Do you want those? So I think it was last year, you requested all of the executive directors and subsequent business managers to come. We offer that to you annually, but it's certainly up to you whether you want them to come or you want your representative to discuss those budgets. And then Gorman, obviously, Christy can give you the highlights of the Gorman, or someone from Gorman can come, which we've had periodically as well, but that's something we ask you annually, whether you want those folks to come and present the budgets.
I just said I'm not qualified to give a budget presentation, like publicly I'll say that, so yeah. Like, I am not the most person. I'm like, no way.
Okay.
I'm not qualified.
We've had LCPI in the past.
Yeah.
And
They
they're,
came all last year. I think you guys had them all come last year because we were new. Yeah, which I think that was a good idea.
do believe. our budget-
I was gonna suggest, we haven't had Gorman in for a while, and it's based upon the questions we had today. Maybe for the new members, would we want them to come in and, you know, they can kind of talk about what the year was, what they do, and then if you guys have any questions.
He's specifically, you're talking about Gorman.
And I'm talking about Gorman.
The others, okay.
Yeah,
But it's what everybody, you know, feels. I just figured I'd throw that out there. Because I don't think you guys have ever been here when Gorman is, not that it's a big deal, but they just haven't been here since, you know, in a while.
Okay, so you want Gorman? Or it will be a representative from Gorman and Associates.
Yes.
Correct.
Mr. Berman is
Not.
And then, I think that
Yeah,
Where are they with the audit? They're probably almost done, right? Or if they're not.
our artist's done, they actually delivered the statement today.
Ah,
The
okay.
books.
I figured it was around that time.
Okay, so yes to Gorman, what do you want to do about LCTI, LTRI-C, and the IU? Well, I heard the comment about the IU. I have no problem.
I think it'd be nice to have Barb Kiston on the place.
You would prefer Barb versus Ann and company, yep.
Unless the.
So Mrs. Kissler, remember, is your board representative for LTRI-C, but I can invite Dr. Kissler. That way you want for LTRI-C? You want Dr. Kissler to come? Okay. Do you want Dr. Ibe, and forgive me for the business administrator's name at the IU? You want them? Jeannie, okay, thank you. You want the IU to come? Yes.
Yeah, because I think there was some conversation about just if there were increases, I think an explanation of funds would be great, as
Okay,
long as I don't have to.
okay. LCTI. I look to Joe, but I get it's a whole board call. If Joe wants to present it or.
Their, if I'm not mistaken, their budget is going up and increasing. It may mean we want to.
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't seen it. I think Christy was sharing with you. I see it tomorrow, so I haven't seen it. Maybe you have.
Sounds like we want them all.
Okay, we want
Why
to,
don't we just,
but do you want LTRI-C's? Do you want Dr. Weber, the executive director, to come, or you want Dr. Kissler to come?
I think Dr.
Dr.
Yeah.
Kissler, do you want the execs and business administrators for the IU and LCPI? Okay, we will make arrangements for that. It's also a good opportunity because the business administrator at the IU is new. The business administrator LCTI is new, and the executive director at LCTI is also new. So even though you met some of those folks, 3 of the 4 and 1 to be coming new, are all new folks. Okay. We will make arrangements with their schedule and your schedule to your board schedule to get them inserted in one of your future meetings.
thank you. Okay, that takes us to old business. Is there any old business? You know, you brought something up before, but was there anything? Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a brief old business. I think this is the best place to put it, but at the beginning of the meeting, when we had the discussion with the visitors. I just like to caution us again about answering emails, replying to emails. As it was said by the family, nobody answered her emails, and we have a position here among the board. We've had a position here among the board that our spokesman for the board is our superintendent in answering emails, and superintendent is closest to the issues and the circumstances behind the emails. And although when we read emails, we like to respond, we really got to think twice about that and let it work up the chain of command, because it can be embarrassing for the board, the individual board member or the entire board, depending on how this thing flows and expands. And that would just be my caution to all of us, just to remember that we do have a policy. It's not a written policy, but we do have a culture here. I guess you would say that our spokesman for the board is our superintendent in answering emails from parents. As much as we'd like to address them and comfort them and do all that, then we can communicate with superintendent if you have a question about the email and get the background on it. But I think it's best if we just let it up to her to respond. That's just
Agreed.
So I get what you're saying, but I think there might be something that we can reply so they know that we are receiving the communication, because that can get really frustrating as a parent. As we saw, she was very frustrated that, oh, she only heard from 2 people, or she didn't hear back, or whatever. Just something saying, hey, I got it, or it is being handled, or something like that can be okay, as opposed to flat out ignoring it, because that gets really frustrating.
Correct.
Jess did write in the past a short,
Like a boilerplate.
yeah.
yes, that you could essentially respond that your message has been received and will be acted upon accordingly or addressed at a future meeting if appropriate. I don't remember exactly what it said, but there was a.
I have that because we asked that question during our board.
I don't want to go down that road though.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit to this and I don't care. I always write back, please, dear so-and-so, thank you so much for your email. I'm sure that it is being handled effectively or something like that. I appreciate the time that you took to correspond with me. Sincerely, Dr. Lauren Hunsiker. I don't address anybody's concerns. I don't want to dialogue about it because again, I'm one of 9, I'm on a board. And 3, I trust that our superintendent can handle that situation, or sometimes they've already written back before I've even seen it. Or I've said, it seems to me like your problem is being worked on. Thank you again for corresponding with me. So, I mean, I see no issue with me acknowledging the fact that I read and got an email.
Yeah.
Based on that, though, you are opening the dialogue.
I don't, that's.
You're
last
trying
and
to
final.
shut it down, but you are opening it.
It's my thank you for corresponding with me. That's it.
But that correspondence was to all of us, not to just you.
Well, right, and I'm
So now
speaking
you're-
of myself.
Well, then answer as you're.
I did.
Okay.
I do.
I don't want to
Sincerely,
get
Dr.
into that
Lawrence.
because if we take it back a couple of years ago. We got emails that you would not believe. And there will come a time where you will be like, I can't do this anymore. And it just.
I don't dialogue
be
past the
careful.
thank you for letting me know.
There's many times I would like to.
It's the same thing
reply
I do
too.
out in the community. I get stopped at soccer games all the time.
Nobody interested.
But no, I get stopped all the time and I say, I was not aware, thank you, and I send it off to the person in charge here, and I've done that many a times. I've texted her and said, hey, this is what, here you go.
I just think we
Done.
have enough to worry about. And that's, it was from the day I started doing this, that I've always looked at. That's the superintendent's role to, if at some point. It's just not meeting a resolve, then we need to step in, and I'm willing to step in for that until. till that, and I respect that you want to do that, that's
I mean, I'm
your,
just speaking to for
and
myself and saying,
just-
I acknowledge the fact that I've read the email.
Right.
I
Yeah.
just ask you.
I don't address
let
the
it
dialogue
affect
with anybody.
The rest of us.
Yeah, to that point, and I haven't seen any replies, so I'm assuming you're
And I
just
do
replying.
separately.
Yeah, so I think that's an important procedure, not
Yes.
to open up a
But this
dialogue.
is
with-
correct. We were allowed to do that. Like
Sure.
the solicitor told us, like a little blurb, thank you for whatever it is, like.
Yeah.
For your email. I appreciate the time that you took to email me. Done.
And overall, I mean, we try to respond to people. They won't always have the answer that they want, and it sometimes isn't from the person they want. So we will always, and that is, we talked about chain command and not such nice terms in this order before, but that you always try to direct it as you would want done for you back to the person that is closest to the issue. If someone has an issue with a teacher, you would hope they would talk to the teacher about that. If they're unsatisfied, there is always a protocol. Everyone has a supervisor, myself included. And so there is a protocol, but there is also a delegation that has to happen in an organization of this size, where you have very capable people and administrators that respond and will get back to people. That I can't be the one who responds. I mean, I know the circumstance you're talking about, and you know how many times I responded. And there were times, and we had recent dialogue with another community member, who I try to answer questions if they have them, or try to correct inaccuracies. But if the person is just making a comment that doesn't require a response, I also don't respond, because there's only so many times you can go back and forth. And you all know the different circumstances of emails you've gotten. I'll try to answer questions. I'll try to correct things that the person might say that is inaccurate. But there's times where someone has an opinion, but there's nothing I'm gonna say or do that's going to change that opinion. They're not asking a question. You certainly all have guidance in terms of how to respond or how not to respond, but yes, I mean, it's been a procedural history of the district that I have been the spokesperson, and it's in my contract that I speak for you on behalf. That is what you authorize me to do and what you task me to do, and ultimately hold me accountable to communicate in the way in which you want me to do and the speed in which you want me to do.
And just because we respond doesn't mean that you're not doing what you're supposed to. But I think if people got to the point where they're emailing everybody here, they are so frustrated with the situation and they just want to feel like somebody has heard them. So if they just get a response back from you, they're like, why did all these other people that I just sent it out to, why did I not hear it? Do they not care?
Not that we don't care.
Well, no, I get that, but people want to feel heard. So.
And there are certain things, as I tried to point out tonight, which is why I sort of stopped part of the conversation. There are certain things that are under the board's purview as topics, and there are certain things that aren't.
Correct.
And specific comments about staff and supervision of staff is not one of them. You supervise me and I supervise ultimately everyone, but there's hierarchies to that as well, which is why that's not necessarily a public discussion, nor is it a board discussion. You hold me accountable to hold those folks accountable. Probably, further conversation, but I mean, all of you have gotten the same guidance from Jessica and the information about, what to respond. I mean, we've heard both sides in terms of people feeling like they need a response. And sometimes they will want a response from you. All 9 of you, even if I do respond to them.
Just one last note. I think when you do a good job answering I believe on behalf of the board. I mean, that's not, as a challenging parent myself, to Becky's point, when I reach out to the board, from my perspective, I've already gone through the proper channels and I'm frustrated, right? So I hear what you're saying, Bill. You got to be careful of the back and forth. We may have received emails where you're like, I don't know what to say, so I'm gonna say nothing, right? I'm gonna hope that you catch this right before it. So I think we all here are somewhat schooled in what's appropriate response and what is not. And I think the direction that we got from Jessica was clear. I am also of the favor. We have to say thank you for your email. You will hear from Mrs. Holman. And that's really what point. Just because as someone who is relatively outspoken and has a high level of demand, I can understand the frustration from someone. So, but I do appreciate the reminder.
Well,
From Bill.
my point is, I know people will go right beyond that chain of command
Agreed.
and just try to go to the top. And I don't view myself as the top. I view her as the top when it comes to those situations. So I tend to stay, I do, I won't. But I'm okay if you respond. I'm not saying, I ask politely that you never make it
Okay.
a board response, make it your.
Oh,
It's never, it's an acknowledgement of receipt of email. It's a very short and sweet summary that I say this. At least for myself, again, I'm speaking from myself.
You're nicer than I am. Just hear that out right now.
All right, thank you. Let's see, we'll move on. New business, we have a donation.
Yeah, on a lighter note, I'll take that one. I'll ask Mr. Just to come in. This donation is from our security guard, and the backstory on this is he was attending our October meeting when we took the donation for a piano. And after that meeting, he said, I have some things I'd like to donate. I didn't know I could do that. How do I do that? So his donation is camera equipment, photography equipment from his family. And we chased down the spot that I think the high school will utilize the equipment. They've accepted it, and we'd like to thank him for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll take official action on that in 2 weeks.
He told me he was gonna
Well,
write a
thank
lie,
you.
that's why I told him. Thank you.
Any other new business? None. This time we'll offer courtesy to the floor. And see none.
You want me to go out, see?
Okay, let's see adjournment. So we need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Mr. Passinger and Mrs. Severance. Right, oh, we do have an exec session. Following this. So give us the okay when we can. Speak freely.
Speech.